started killing all these different people. And so we didn't know why Thor's hammer had an effect turned evil. And of course, it basically turned out that Thor's hammer was now a sentient being. Now, the reason for that is because the entire base, right, the power of Thor's hammer is rooted in what was called the Mother Stone. Basically, at some previous point in time, Odin had captured a cosmic entity and placed it inside the hammer, or placed it in a piece of guru metal that was forged into the hammer. So quite literally, Thor has been channeling the power of a cosmic entity whenever he was wielding his hammer. And this made perfect sense, because it answered the question how it is that despite how capable Thor is, the hammer always seemed to allow him to overcome forces that were oftentimes more powerful than he was, right? Like Juggernaut. Juggernaut's a perfect example. Juggernaut is powered by an elder god whose power dwarfs most all magical beings out there, with the exception of maybe like Chthon and like Zal, and like that's it. That's really it, right? Like the power of Sidorak is insane and is way beyond the power of Thor. Yet somehow he was always able to hold his own against Juggernaut and even defeat him using the power of Mjolnir. Except for the old stories when Juggernaut had a force field and then Mjolnir didn't work on it. Somebody's inevitably going to say that, so I'm going to beat you to the punch. But the thing about this is it's a crazy thing, because in this moment, obviously, the god of hammers is now the wielder of the hammer itself. And Thor himself cannot overcome the power of the god of hammers. So in effect, he can't control his own hammer. He is just as subservient to his power as anybody else. So when the hammer's thrown at him and it lands on top of him and he's basically and faces the possibility of drowning, there's nothing he can do to stop it. And even with the god of hammers itself, there's nothing he can do to stop this thing. And so ultimately the question's asked by Thor, because remember, Thor doesn't know the story of the hammer. He doesn't know that Odin basically locked a cosmic entity inside this hammer. He doesn't know any of that. All he knows is just like the hammer was something that he couldn't lift when he was younger because of the enchantment of Odin, and then eventually he was able to pick it up because he was worthy, and like that's basically it. What Donny Cates does to him, he turns the entire thing on its head, and it's amazing, right? So Thor asks a question, right? He says, who are you? What kind of trick is this? How are you doing this? And ultimately the hammer says, Thor, you wound me, right? You and I have been together for so long, well, except for that brief dalliance that I had with Jane Foster, which pissed off a bunch of fans of the Thor community, although I love the Jane Foster story. And so the hammer says, like, you of all people should know about sowing one's wild oats, right? And the hammer's just kind of like, call it a date. Like, I just wanted to try something a little bit different. Now, where that almost seems like a kind of offhanded remark, the hammer kind of poking fun at Thor, there's actually a basis behind this, right? Which is so crazy, because Thor asks a question like, you don't know anything about me. And where Thor gets ready to like go on this rant, right? But if you want to learn, like, let me up and I will show you and so on and so forth. And the god of hammers like, no, you know, I'm done. Like, I'm tired of hearing your speeches. And says, that's ultimately what this all comes down to, right? Speeches, titles, crowns, thrones, parliaments and senate meetings and blah, blah, blah. I'm just afraid.
All right, let's do it, fellas.
Here's the kicker to this, right? Here's the caveat to this. If, you know, when that story was told to us, right? When we were given this revelation that Odin had trapped a cosmic entity inside the hammer, and that's the basis behind his power, we had to know something like this was coming eventually, right? Something like this would have to take place. A sentient, living, thinking thing trapped inside of a metal artifact, trapped inside of a weapon, would at some point desire to break free. And that was one of the things that was kind of established here, right? It was sort of unofficially explained over the course of like Jason Aaron's run and like Donny Cates' run. And even if you take this information, this really gives you credence to how hardcore, how intensely Donny Cates was looking at Thor. You look back at the old Walt Simonson run from way back in the day, right? From like 70s, 80s, and whatnot. You basically get this point where you're just kind of like, okay, so the only reason Thor was ever able to wield this hammer is because the hammer allowed it. The hammer allowed him to wrap the hammer. And it had nothing to do with Odin's enchantment. And so it's kind of cool because Thor, of course, summons the lightning and it's a portion of the Odin Force. Because remember, Thor has the Odin Force in him. Odin is currently like, he's not the Alpha anymore. So ultimately, Thor ends up channeling the lightning and creating like a lightning-based sword, which is amazing. Right? It's just this ridiculously cool thing. But in the end, like when he goes to face this hammer, like the hammer's just kind of like, do you never learn? Right? Like, have you never learned anything? Thor, the god of thunder, you should really know better. No one can outrun the lightning. And so when Thor goes to launch,
all right, let's put some in there.
The god of hammer sticks up the hammer, and Thor shatters his arm. Like literally cannot break through his arm.
EA Sports coverage of the National Football League is on the air. Straight ahead, it's Wild Card Weekend, and we've got a great one in store between the Dallas Cowboys.
Right? And when Thor's totally shocked,
what the fuck happened?
Like, I know more than almost anyone. I know how this must feel. I have been there, Thor Odin's son, at your side, in your hand, every single time and you have beaten back another gathering storm of death. I have watched for eons. I know all of your deeds, even those that you forgot, all of your triumphs, all of your secrets, all of your weaknesses. And yes, Thor, you can be broken. You simply just have to know how. And so at that point, you get this really amazing moment where, like, Odin steps in. Now, here's the thing to understand. This is a big deal. In years past, this is something Odin almost never would have done. Odin would have just
Let's get this dub, fellas.
Like, you're the All-Father, you do your thing. And that's kind of the crazy thing. Odin has almost always been callous whenever it came to his involvement with Thor. He's almost kind of been, he treated him like a father treats a son to a degree, but there was always this barrier. There was always this thing where Odin was never the guy who would read Thor like a bedtime story or anything like that, right? He wouldn't really raise his son in the way that we as people here would raise our sons, right? When you are a father raising your son, there's a bond there that just can never really be broken. In a healthy father-son relationship, there is an incredibly unique bond there. When you're little kids, the roles are reversed, right? The sons are closer to the mothers, the daughters are closer to the fathers. But as time progresses and the sons need to learn how to become a man, become a healthy, productive man that can give back to the world, they look to their father to be that source of guidance. And that's where that bond forms. And to a degree, that was the case between Thor and Odin. It was the case that Thor would often look to Odin for some measure of guidance. But the kind of guidance Odin would provide would be like, don't disappoint me, boy. Like, it was that kind of a thing, right? A very harsh kind of guidance, right? Not very much a spiritual guide in that capacity, right? Odin was always incredibly hard on his son. And so to see him step in here like this, save his life, and then say, like, let's end this damn thing, shall we? That when the hammer thinks that Odin is talking to Thor, the response of Odin is, no, I'm not talking to you. I'm saving my son's life, obviously, but I'm not referencing you. That what Odin was doing was working directly with. Now remember, Sif is basically replaced Heimdall. She's the one that controls the Bifrost. Alright, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back again with the legend.
Over 4 seasons, Knight Rider defined the 1980s action-adventure series. A handsome star besting crooks with a little help from his high-tech supercar. It was barely off the air before it was brought back for these two very different attempts to jumpstart the franchise.
EA Sports coverage of the National Football League is on the air. Straight ahead, it's Wild Card Weekend, and we've got a great one in
What the fuck going on, man?
Knight Rider ended in 1986, not because of low ratings, but because Universal Studios accountants worked out that they couldn't squeeze enough money out of the syndication deal as they would have liked. In 1991, NBC broadcast a made-for-TV movie, Knight Rider 2000, where we would see the gang get back together, sort of, but not really, in the hopes of launching a new cast in a new series. In the year 2000, Natch, in an unnamed city,
we're not any of those cities.
handguns have been banned and criminals sentenced to suspended animation, which seems kind of less like a serious punishment and more of a timeout. I mean, by that logic, if you're absolutely busting to see where George R.R. Martin is going with A Song of Ice and Fire and can't wait 400 years, you might as well stick up a liquor store and skip the wait. A group of gun runners led by the paroled criminal Watts are trafficking in banned weapons, while the cops make do with ultrasonic stun guns. Police officer Sean McCormack is shot point blank in the head by Watts, yet somehow survives. He's not a very good shot. There's a way to save her life, but the police commissioner nixes the idea for budgetary reasons. The hospital surgeon decides that, as he has a few hours left before fantasy football, he will just perform the life-saving partial transplant anyway.
Have you ever performed one of these before?
No, but I've logged 90 hours on the surgical simulator.
Yeah, if it were me, I'd get a second opinion. Meanwhile, Devon Miles and his new offsider at the Knight Foundation, Russell Maddock, are trying to close a deal with city officials over their Knight 4000 vehicle. With only 30 days to deliver their prototype, Devon turns to an old friend. Michael Knight is off living a tranquil life of bass fishing, which I suppose is okay, so long as you're not the bass.
One man can make a difference. But that man's not me anymore.
Michael reluctantly agrees to come back temporarily to help finish the Knight 4000, only to find Maddock has scrapped his beloved Knight 2000 car, as well as kit, and sold off a lot of the bits on Craigslist. Rather than drive around and look for houses with bits of Firebird Trans Am scattered on the front lawn, electronics genius Michael takes whatever leftover bits remain and manages to cobble together a version of Kit and installs it in his 57 Chevy.
You've obviously gone down the toilet since we split up, Michael. Get a life.
Thanks to her surgery, Sean makes a miraculous recovery, though she's had some memory loss. She resigns from the police force and applies for a job at the Knight Foundation,
I was shot point blank in the head, and I want to nail the bastard who did it.
where it's soon apparent that her transplant surgery involved, now let me get this straight, a recycled chip from Kit that had been sold off by Matic, bought by the hospital, implanted in her head, so now she's got part of Kit's prissy personality, which is more personality than Sean had previously displayed. As the film progresses, we learn that almost every single character aside from Matic is in on What's gun running conspiracy. Most of the cops, the surgeon who saved Sean's life, and the mayor. That really only leaves Matic and the police commissioner, despite both of them at times made to look like they actually could be villains themselves.
Michael, kindly tell this obnoxious person to remove her hands from my wheel.
The car talks.
Michael and Sean work together, but after being chased by the villains, Kit sacrifices himself to save the pair.
Michael, take care of yourself.
Devon is kidnapped and just ups and dies. Michael, having lost his two best friends, gives up and heads off home to get drunk on his kitchen floor. Of course, that doesn't last, and pretty soon Michael has rebuilt Kit again and placed him into the newly completed Knight 4000, which has a fancy virtual reality mode that seems to consist purely of the same solarization effect that you had built into a cheap camcorder.
What the fuck going on,
Other
man?
than that, it's just a weird-looking red car. After a shootout in a mall, Michael talks Sean out of killing Watts, telling her how much she will regret it if she kills Watts. And then Michael shoots Watts with a Nerf gun and he falls to his death. Michael's done with the crime fighting, but a reborn Kit is ready to work with Sean and Matic on any new adventures that would... that was it, one and done. The script is quite ordinary, with very little sparkle and none of the goofy, easygoing charm of the series.
I love all you guys.
The plot is really all over the place.
Last invite.
Hotel owner would say after running a black light over their rooms the day after senior prom.
I don't enjoy being tense.
Certain story elements seem about as likely as me getting a bank loan to start a food truck business that only sells sauerkraut subs. Though, thinking about it now, I really do think Das Baguette would work. David Hasselhoff was at the time working on the relaunched syndicated version of Baywatch, so he was not going to be available for any new Knight Rider series. He suggested a series of TV movies, but in the end, only one was ordered, which attracted good ratings. Even so, NBC didn't order more movies, which left Universal scratching for ways to make it work for them from a cost standpoint. But if it rated well, why only one movie?
Kid, say hello to Sean McCormick. She has your missing chip implanted in her brain.
NBC's internal testing showed that while they liked seeing more Knight Rider, Susan Norman as Sean McCormick was not well liked, and so a new series starring her was seen as something that, like John Madden, wouldn't fly. Susan Norman has zero personality before she's shot, and then she acts like she's the progeny of a Vulcan and an Encarta 95 CD-ROM before toning that down in the last act. David Hasselhoff and Edward Malthair slip into their older characters as easily as someone would slip into a pair of comfy shoes.
You dumb as
And
fuck.
then
Can you
Devin
hear what
sits
I'm
in the
saying?
trailer and dies with
Since
all
you
the
can't
drama of
breathe.
an unboxing video.
Can I talk about that ass?
Hello?
I did what I had to survive.
I ain't about to lip box with your big lip ass.
You ain't got a little box. You can't motherfucking read. Hell, what else you want me to do? Braille and shit to you?
Hold on, chump. Let me fix your mic for you real quick, cause you talking some sucker shit.
You don't need to fix my
Hold on. I'ma fix it for you. Punk. There you go. There you go. Let's fix his mic. We ain't about to do the lip boxing. My dude sound like he having a little bit of a thyroid problem. Ain't about to talk me out of my game. Let's go, baby. We got her.
There's no mention of any of the other regulars from the Knight Rider series, and Michael is now able to rebuild Kit twice without once burning himself on the soldering line. The Knight 4000 was heavily inspired by the look of Pontiac's Banshee 4 concept car from the late 80s, but the actual actual vehicle used here was a Mitsubishi 3000 GT, also sold as a Dodge Stealth, with a custom body. Either way, I'm not a fan of its look. Also, for a telemovie trying to relaunch Knight Rider, the car action is utterly lacking. We get a few chase scenes with Michael's old Chevy, one scene
You heard that shit? This shit's still loading.
But there's nothing close to Super Pursuit Mode or even Commodore Garden Turbo Boost.
It's the National Football League presented by EA Sports. Straight ahead, it's Wild Card Weekend, and we've got a great one in store between the Dallas Cowboys and...
Yeah.
There's very little humor apart from this one brilliant scene where Kid thinks he stunned one of the villains.
Traitors on stun, Captain. Don't tell me you're a closet Trekkie. I don't think I can hold them, Mr. Spock.
While Kid can still do things like remotely influence circuits or stun people, he doesn't do much of what we would normally associate with Knight Rider. As a way of ending the story for Devon, it's deeply unsatisfying, though Michael sort of gets a half-decent send-off. And that was it. No Susan Norman series.
I understand you ordered the plug pulled on me.
But a few years later, in 1994, Knight Rider 2010 appeared. It's a fair way into the future. Jake McQueen is a smuggler who gets involved in the organ trafficking trade. That is to say, human organs, not Hammond organs. Though if the market was there, I'm sure he'd load a few B3s on the back of his pimped-out monster truck. LA is under a giant dome, and it's a place that people, apart from Kurt Russell, are escaping to. The company Chrysalis is led by this guy suffering from ALS.
Same smuggler.
McQueen, I know. I'm having him brought to you.
Normally something to do with computers, but their sideline involves human organs harvested from those lawless areas outside of LA and transplanting them. His name is Jared. I have never thought of the name Jared as a serial killer name. Until now. Jared, one of his employees, is video game designer Hannah, apparently Jake's ex-girlfriend. Jake is wanted by the law and captured by his adopted brother, Marshal Will McQueen. Jake and Will's father is killed by Jared's henchmen, and then Jake and an associate build an armoured car based on the shell of an old Mustang. Yeah, you're waiting for the Knight Rider bits. Well, so am I. As this was made in the 90s, VR was seen as the next big thing.
Prison, jacking into medical research.
Well,
While she's connected to
I
virtual
tried.
reality, Jared attacks Hannah.
Ain't gonna be able to play this lame.
But her consciousness lives on inside the
You gonna catch me on some duty,
in this crystal thin
or I might try to play this other league
Jake then
game
installs the prison
if they
crystal
advance
into
it
his car so that Hannah
and it
becomes
go
his
my way.
in-car computer. After dealing with Jared and
But
his
that's the end of
mutants
this
in a
broadcast,
recent
baby.
action sequence, Hannah appears to
We
Jake
got
as
more
a
weed, though.
hologram. Tells him they can be
Holla
together
back.
in the virtual world.
Problem is, Cowboy. Rolling out